You are listening to the Cultural Providers Network podcast, a Minnesota Association for Children's Mental Health production, building and sustaining a network of culturally and ethnically diverse voices to promote policies, practices, standards, and research that improve the mental health of children, their families, and communities.
This podcast is brought to you by the Minnesota Department of Health. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Cultural Providers Network podcast. I am your host, Brandon Jones, and on today's episode, we have Rachel Surratt. I almost couldn't say it. I had it right in my head, but I almost couldn't say it. But I got it out. Rachel, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. How are you today?
Perfect. I'm doing pretty well today as well. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I'm looking forward to diving in, learning a little bit about you and your perspective, being a person of color in this field of mental health and well-being. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? Where you come from? What got you into kind of this field and this space?
Yeah. So I have wanted to be in the mental health space since like the second grade. I've had a family experience with like some severe mental health issues that really just activated me in a way of like needing to know more, needing to understand other people. And that is really where I got started. I went to undergrad at Colorado State, so kind of been all around. I'm not a military kid, but like you would think that the amount of times I've been around the states. So went to undergrad at CSU at Colorado, and then came here to St. Thomas for my graduate program, and have kind of been here ever since, just working in like the private practice space and really trying to cultivate the people that I see to reflect myself, folks of color, trauma worlds, things like that.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing. So similar to you, that's how I kind of got into the field myself. Life experience has led into professional curiosity, educational curiosity, and kind of landed here. I often tell my story and say I come from a household of trauma and drama. And the drama and trauma was around domestic violence. And then from the domestic violence came family secrets and other levels of trauma. And then I was in this space of I was a football player and a nerd in high school, more of a nerd that could play football well. And that led me to go to the University of Minnesota, which I didn't play football there. I was on an academic scholarship, but I was flunking. I was failing out. I was a pre-dentistry major, believe it or not. I was going to be a dentist, and the only class I was passing was a class called People and Problems, which from my life I knew a bunch of people, a bunch of problems, so it made a lot of sense. But I didn't realize what the actual class was till I talked to my professor. She said, "This is sociology, and you're good at it. I like reading your essays. You should think about getting a PhD." And I was like, "What is a PhD?" I didn't say that part out loud, but I didn't know anything. I was a first generation college student. I was just happy to be on a campus. So I went back to my dorm room. I Googled what is a PhD and found out there's this thing called grad school. And that was just like, oh, I didn't know that there was college after college. So that just led to like this curiosity of figuring things out. And then my first job out of undergrad was working in a psych department at St. Joseph's Hospital, which is no longer in existence here in St. Paul. And from there, I was working. I was working overnights. I was pretty much the muscle, get a young black dude work overnights. He can be tough with the people who are causing issues. I got paid really well, but I noticed something probably about 4 months into that job that a lot of times I would see behaviors or even just interactions with some of the patients where they resembled things that I seen in the community, but we never called it mental health. It was just like something's wrong with Reggie, something's wrong with Sasha, like leave those people alone type of thing. And that was like my light bulb moment, like, oh, I could probably help folks from a different angle. And then that's when I started considering going to school for therapy. So very interesting dynamic, very interesting dynamic. Let me ask my next question for you. When you think of cultural considerations, how do you integrate cultural sensitivity and awareness into your practice, especially with any clients of color that you work with?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that for me, so much of the work that I do is seeking to understand and be curious about people without, well, the easy answer is like without judgment and all these things, because, the therapy space, you're kind of supposed to not have judgment. But I look at it more as instead of not having judgment for these people, I'm actually having like a vested interest in figuring out where does the place that you come from, where does this help you? And also where does it hurt you? And like allowing for the people that I speak with to just be honest with me about that. I think that when a person comes to me, especially people of color, there's a lot of shame and a sense of like needing to protect the identity that they have, because they're, and I as well, are used to having to defend from other people. And so I really try to integrate it by allowing the space to just be completely themselves, even if they need to tell me some really hard stuff about the things that I don't know, but also knowing that there's probably some beautiful pieces to the culture and the community that people come from. And I want to know how we can use those things to help them in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So when you're doing that and you're interacting with, a client or clients, I'm assuming intersectionality comes up, right? So when we talk about culture, it's hard to get away from, class, gender, sexual orientation. Of course,
Mm.
race and ethnicity come up. How do you kind of address these multiple things that pop up with your clients?
Yeah. Well, to use a therapy answer, I think it depends. For a lot of folks, what I focus on first is building the relationship like person to person. So I really try to connect with them in ways that are separate from the way society sees them and the way society sees me. And once we have that foundation, I will often just bring it up as we're in the space, like a few sessions down the line, maybe. Some people are ready to get into it right away. And so I'll bring it up myself of, hey, as your Black female therapist, this is what I'm seeing, or this is my perspective on a specific topic we might be talking about. How does it make you feel that I'm pointing this out in the space? So really inviting people to talk about it without having this like stigma attached to it of like, oh, is this the right time, is this the right place? Like, yes, therapy is the right time and place for everything, and I'll be the first to bring that up. When it comes to having white clients, I actually take a different approach, because
Okay.
I feel that it's very important for myself to take care of me as
Right.
well, and that intrinsic part of my identity. And so I might wait a little bit longer to bring it up if I decide to be the one to bring it up. A lot of folks that I build a relationship with get to a point where they're like, I think I need to bring this up, that I've noticed this about you and I'm
Mhm.
not ignoring it. And that gives me the chance to kind of take care of myself and my needs without needing to like constantly perform this identity for particularly white clients, but still allow them the space to like figure it out and explore it in a way that they know is non-judgmental with a person of color.
Absolutely. Wow, great. Do you have a specific therapeutic approach or um like therapeutic focus? Like some people are psychoanalytic, some people practice, like I heard you say trauma earlier. Some people are really hyper focused on trauma. They may be in MDR or they utilize CBT. Like do you have like a plethora of things that you utilize, or what's your kind of approach towards therapy?
Yeah. So I like to say that I'm an ACBT CT therapist.
Got it.
I like to use ACT, acceptance and
Yep.
commitment therapy. And
Yep.
then I believe in throwing in some of the cognitive behavioral means as well. I don't prescribe to the idea that CBT is the be all end all of talk therapy. I think it can leave a lot out and it can be a little bit too clinical. So the way that I explain it to folks is first, I want to help a person throw all their pieces, all their puzzle pieces onto the table, right? Just let it all out. Let's figure out what we have in front of us. That is what we're here to do. Um, and then I teach in the acceptance piece how to do that without shame and judgment for yourself. So teaching a lot of self-compassion, um, about your trauma, but also about the parts that you like about yourself. Like, how do we make those more apparent? How do we celebrate those pieces so that we can look at the puzzle on the table and say, oh my gosh, this is you and this is your totality. That's amazing. Now that we have that, can we get into the CBT and figure out what parts we might want to shift or evolve? so that our behaviors can change as well. And then once we're through with the CBT, it's when we get to the commitment part of ACT, where, okay, now we see you, right? The good, the bad, the otherwise. We've figured out what we can tweak and how it feels to do that. And now that we've done it, how can we keep doing it? What does it look like to keep doing it when I'm not here in front of you? Can that internal therapist voice take charge instead of like the social society voice, or our inner critic, our inner cop, things like that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about community impact. What role do you believe that mental health providers play in addressing systematic issues, so such as discrimination, racism, even intergenerational trauma to a certain extent within
Mhm.
communities of color?
Yeah, big question. I think that for me, I look at it as my individual role is a little bit different than the community there, like
Hmm.
Black and people of color therapy
Hmm.
role. Because wholeheartedly, I believe that it's our job to help facilitate revolution, honestly. But I also feel like as an individual, that revolution might not look as big as as a system.
Mm,
It might be
absolutely.
the individual's revolution, right? So like, how can I help this person break free of the stigma that they have internalized as well, or manage the stigma that we can't control externally? Am I a space where you just need to talk crap, right? And vent and express how there's something that we know needs to change, but we can't be the
Yeah.
two people to change it.
Yeah.
So really like creating space for people to be in the situation in the world around us as it is, and really be okay with the fact that it's not great in a lot of ways, and it causes harm, and instill and maintain hope for leaving my space with you and still being able to help in the community to figure out, okay, this sucks, how do I maintain hope, where
Right.
can I go to find hope if I'm struggling to do so? Is that me, or is that the therapy community at large, right?
Yeah.
So a very nuanced role, I think, but it's really important. I never take it lightly, that's for sure.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you. What are some, you kind of talked about this a little bit, so you may be repeating yourself just a tad bit, but what are some strategies or techniques that you'll find effective in working with your clients of color as they're on their healing journeys, and also the level of empowerment, which I also hear you speaking about, to advocate for their own mental health needs?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, there's so many things that come to mind for that. The biggest thing I see as really impactful for clients of color is some psychoeducation without the like, forgive me, but the old white man with
Yeah.
glasses
Yeah.
on the couch. Like, I don't believe in like, let me tell you about yourself.
Yeah.
Instead, I believe in the approaching it as like, let me tell you about humans,
Right.
kind of like the sociology way, right? Of like,
Right. Right.
this is what is common to the human experience. And so let me help you understand that you're not crazy for feeling the way that you do, right?
Mhm.
So a lot of nervous system regulation tools is really helpful. Just teaching about like, hey,
Yeah.
when we are dysregulated or overwhelmed or under the stresses of capitalist white supremacy, this
Right.
is how our body intrinsically reacts and responds. So don't view yourself with guilt or shame for responding this way.
Right.
That's kind of like step one.
Hmm.
And then to go along with that, like emotional regulation as well. I think in the communities of color, I specifically focus on,
Hmm.
we don't talk about our emotions,
Right.
right? Like, we're like, oh, I'm having an off day, or I'm
Yeah.
gonna just push through, and I have
Yep.
no idea how I'm feeling. I'm just going through the world feeling. And so
Yep.
I really try to bring a space where we're gonna slow down and we're gonna identify how that feeling feels in your body to feel it,
Yep.
and what it might mean, and what stories you're cooking up about those
Mhm.
feelings.
Mhm.
So like really giving people permission to exist in their most human self.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Yeah, you remind me of a few things. One, I do a lot of training, so you might
Okay.
see my face somewhere or hear me training at some point. And one
Yeah.
of the trainings I'm talking about psychotherapy and how something I call healing justice. is I show this slide deck and I call it the extended Mount Rushmore of psychology. And it's 10 well-known psychologists from Freud to and Jung to Erickson, everybody is on there. And then I just put the picture on the screen. I say, "What do you notice?" And I just wait for the audience to respond. And they always laugh and say, "It's a bunch of old white dudes." I'm like, "Yes, but what else? Like, what else do you notice?" And the whole point of the exercise is to say these are the folks that we study in the textbook. These are the folks who we gather all their knowledge and information and we try to reapply it back into the communities that we serve. And at some point, we have to, one, respect that, but we have to advance the worldview of mental health. And we have to understand that these are not the only perspectives on healing or understanding humans or anything. And if we stay stuck with those 10 individuals, we're never going to do the thing that we kind of committed to doing in this work because communities and cultures shift and change, and we have to pay attention to that. So it's like an aha moment for the audience. But you're reminding me of that because most people's worldview of therapy is what? Laying on the couch with their back with a box of Kleenex with the older white man with a sweater vest and glasses and a clipboard taking notes from you because that's how it's been depicted to us in books and movies and television shows forever. But it doesn't have to look like that. And in my experience, a lot of the really great therapeutic work that I've done, it's never been like that. It's always been a different type of experience for the client and for myself. So that's a good point that you mentioned there earlier. Um,
Yeah.
well, yeah, I was
That
gonna say.
I love that slide deck idea too. I should
I'll send it to
really
you if you want me to. Just send me an email like, hey, send me that slide. I'll send it to you. You can definitely use it.
that's awesome.
What was I gonna say? I was gonna say something else. I forgot. You already answered that question. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit about the future outlook because this kind of gets into what I was just sharing. So what changes or improvements would you like to see in the mental health field to better support what about you in two ways?
Mhm.
BIPOC clients and BIPOC professionals. So if you could think about what improvements can be done for both, what would you say?
Ooh, well, being a therapist and always thinking about my clients first,
Yep.
I feel like the answer that comes to mind is definitely for the client. I really strongly feel like it's our duty to dismantle the white male
Mhm.
therapy
Mhm.
ideology. Like that is what I want for the future of therapy. Um, I think what I see a lot with my clients is them coming in and expecting me to tell them about themselves a little bit. Like you're the expert, you are supposed to kind of like in a clinical way, like you diagnose me, you take two pills and call me in the morning.
Mhm.
I want the future of therapy to be understood as somewhere where you come to do your work with a person who cares about you.
Mhm.
Um, and to me, that's very decolonial. Like the back to the idea of like you're here to be part of our collective community of healing. You're not here to have this doctoral relationship with me. That's
Right.
not why I'm here, right? So I think that that's really important for um, clients. And
Mhm.
then on the other end, I think support is a huge
Yeah.
thing. My clinical supervisor for graduate school is, I still speak with her and work with her, a wonderful white woman.
Mhm.
Um, we are both constantly always aware that there are pieces that she can't give me.
Yeah.
And I think that what I need and what we both know that I need and try to go get is a place where there are BIPOC clinicians that I can talk to that intrinsically understand why the work might be a little bit harder in
Mhm.
certain ways without me having to couch it maybe
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
even explain it. Like
Yeah.
there are intrinsic parts of being a non-white human and a BIPOC human that I don't want to have to explain to the people that I'm looking to for guidance. And so I think that a huge future for BIPOC clinicians is gaining more of a sense of support, more supervisors, more professors in that
Mhm.
space, more spaces just
Mhm.
to be and exist with each other as well, so not feel as isolated and like we're sometimes talking to a void, I think.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And that's honestly part of why this podcast was created was to create this space, but also give voice to hear what do we need in this field? How are we viewing the communities that we serve? And then what do we need as actual practitioners? This podcast is actually a part one phase of many other parts to relaunch what the Culture Providers Network was, and do exactly what you're asking, is create this space where we can come together, we can learn, we can have some fun, and we can support each other all in one space. Now, it's not right now what we're thinking is it's not going to be something that is every like month, but like once a quarter where we can just gather and be very intentional about the time that we spend together. So we're getting there. We're working on that. And we'll love to invite you on that journey if you have any ideas or want to support or help plan. We definitely like that as well. Um, so what about the future of mental health and the involvement of inclusiveness, equity, and accessibility? Do you have any thoughts there on where we could help improve things or things that we should be considering?
Mm. I think that what should always be considered is the reason why people are afraid to come forward now, and honoring that. A lot of times, particularly being here in Minneapolis and Minnesota at large for the past few years, a lot of things have got started, right? And a lot of things have been like, oh, here's this money, here's this resource, please use it. But no acknowledgement to why wasn't this here before? That's harmful. What
Right.
do I do with it now? And are you going to facilitate me keeping this momentum in the future? And so I think that there has to be a collective mental health revolution and reckoning a bit of like, let's give each other and ourselves the space to sit down and say, you know what, here's where we actually messed up. Here's where there have been tremendous gaps. Let me give you the time to heal from that harm and still offer my support, right? So the money's not going away. However, do you need a space first to come and talk about how pissed off it makes you that the money
Right.
wasn't there before, right?
Right. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think you make a good point about these things start and they stop, and that's one of the things I think is going to be important for the success of whatever the Culture Providers Network creates. Is like, why is that? What do these things just lose motive? Like, is there motivation? Are we just too busy, too spread out? Is it not enough resources? Like, I think there's some questions that need to be answered to how do we make this a lot more sustainable. I look at, so I'm connected to two of the Black kind of mental health provider groups. So we have the Association of Black Psychologists, and then we also have the Black Social Workers group. And when I look at both of those groups, I'm like, man, they they're struggling, and they're struggling for two different reasons. One, I'll talk about the Black social workers first. A lot of the folks who are tapped in with that are older. They are either at retirement age or very close, and they haven't replenished the group. And also, there's some restrictions and things I think kind of create this divide. Is you have to have a PhD to be the president, like, or to be in any leadership, which a lot of providers of color, Black providers, they'll have master's degrees, if that. So that's already creating a barrier for some people to maintain it, because you have the same folks kind of cycling out of the leadership. They just kind of trade spaces, and then they don't market very well either. Like, a lot of folks don't know that they're there. You usually have to know one of those elders to be kind of connected. So that's one of those groups. I'm like, man, that's a huge important group, but in the next 5 years, will they be in existence? And then the same thing with the Black social workers. They're not as close to retirement age. Some are, but not all of them. But they don't know. A lot of folks don't know about them. If you have a LICSW and you're Black, there's a good chance that you may be working at an agency, or you may have a private practice like yourself, but you've never heard of them. And it's like, we have to learn about the marketing and the connection piece and really cultivate these groups as much as possible, or even do some collaborations between two, because I don't think those two groups even speak to one another, which is also an interesting piece to this puzzle as well.
Yeah, good point. It's like this idea where we're designed to be divided,
Right,
in a way where it's like we don't talk to each other, so we can't advance together as a community.
right,
And yeah, that needs to stop.
right, absolutely. So I have a few closing questions for you as we kind of get close to wrapping up our interview with you today. Um, is there anything that you'd like the audience to know about your journey as a provider of color? Either your perspective on the importance of cultural, whether you call it competence, responsiveness, humility, or my term, cultural intelligence. What would you like folks to know about yourself?
Hmm. I think what I find most important to know is that my identity is intrinsically linked to the type of therapy that I give,
Yeah.
and that is where the work is done. That is what facilitates healing. There's I felt in graduate school a little bit this feeling of like, okay, I need to be this specific type of therapist. I need to present this specific type of way because that's what I've seen before.
Mhm.
Professionalism, love that word, as if that's not seeped in whiteness. Um, and the further away I got from that, the more I realized, you know what, the more I try to be what I think a good therapist is, the less I'm being myself and the less connected I feel with people.
Mm, yeah.
Um, so yeah, I want people to know that like what you see is what you get, and you're gonna
Mhm.
get my whole self,
Mhm.
and that that's what I'm supposed to be here to do. I'm not
Mhm.
supposed to be here to give you parts of me. I give you the whole me.
Mhm. Absolutely. That actually reminds me of, because this is a experience I had when I was in grad school. I went to Adler Graduate School for my
Mhm.
second master's. And I remember we were in class and our instructor was telling us, we were talking about transference, countertransference, and we were talking about disclosure. And she was very adamant about not telling your clients about yourself. And I remember sitting there like, this is going to be a huge problem for any of my clients of color, especially my black clients, because
Yeah.
black folks want to know who you are, where you come from, who your grandma is. Like, we want to know about you, like what you like to do on the weekend. We want to feel a connection. And I'm just sitting there like, this is not gonna go well for me. Like it was just like, this is not gonna go well. So what
Mhm.
I've learned to do when I started to get into practicum and actually practicing, I learned to have a spiel. And my spiel would always lead with like who I am. Like I would start very early. Like I'm Brandon Jones. I'm originally from St. Paul, born and raised. I grew up in a household full of trauma and drama. Like I would say that purposely so
Mhm.
that people, one, it would get a little chuckle out of my clients. Like, what does that mean? And then two, let them know like, hey, I have some life experience here too. It's not just the books, right? And then I would go into just a little bit of my experience. Like, I experienced domestic violence as a kid. I played football. Da, da, da. I would give them enough to just identify with something. And then we would get into, let's talk about yourself and let's talk about what we can do. But what I learned was by creating that spiel and giving a little bit of that history, it kind of eased us into the therapeutic conversations. And I think it also humanized me as a professional because a lot of community of color, when they do come to you, they still see you as a system.
Yep.
There's still some anxiety. They don't know what they say, how it will be impactful to their lives. So there's some caution there. And by letting folks know, like, hey, I have some life experience too that may be similar or you may be familiar with. So I understand where you're coming from was always a tool that fared pretty well for me. So as an instructor now, I teach grad school at Metro State in the co-occurring disorders program. I
Mhm.
always and I teach a diversity class, of course. And I tell my students, I say you need to figure out all of you, no matter who you're working with, figure out a way to connect with your clients. And not doesn't mean tell them all your business and tell them everything, but find that connection point because it will help them and it will help you build that rapport. And that's one of the key things that you can do. And I kind of heard you saying that too. Do you have a response to that? Because it wasn't really a question, it was more of a soapbox. But do you, any
Oh,
thoughts?
it's a good soapbox because I think that I am the same way with
Yeah,
clients and honestly coworkers of like you
absolutely. Thank you for
yeah,
saying
right.
that.
Like I'm gonna give you as much as I can of myself, and the things that I choose to keep my for myself, respect that those are my boundaries, right?
Hmm.
So I'm the same way. Like I want you to know who you're speaking to, and I want you to get more comfortable, maybe not totally comfortable,
Yeah.
with the idea that we share openly in
Mm-hmm.
this space, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you're allowed to know things about me, you're allowed to ask questions about me, and I'm allowed to tell you when I'm not comfortable answering some of those things, right? Like I love when clients are like, I have a million questions for who you are.
Yeah.
And I think it's really good to model a relationship where I'm allowed to have boundaries with you, right? I'm allowed to tell you this is what matters and this is what's important to keeping myself.
hmm Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for saying that. I've had those experiences too with clients where like, I bet you do this, or I bet you do that. And it's up to me to decide if I'm gonna answer it with the full truth or just tell them enough to just whet their appetite.
Exactly. And
Oh,
it's
that's so funny. Yeah, awesome,
so
awesome.
tough.
So we're pretty much at the end of our interview. Is there anything that you would like to share that we haven't covered that but you think is important for people to know?
I think something that I always talk about, and I probably have touched on it a little bit, but a bit more, is just knowing how important I feel it is to find a therapist that integrates the body and the mind. I really, really feel like, particularly with BIPOC folks, our existence is steeped in trauma, right? There's so
Yeah,
much that we intake and we don't even realize that like we're cataloging it in the back of our mind, but our body is still processing.
right.
So I think it's so important that if a person is looking for a resource, even if it's not a therapy resource, a book, I don't know, a podcast, for example, that they are aware of how their mind and their body are connected and how our mind might not be letting us know about things that our body is trying to tell us, and not
hmm
in the way. I read The Body Keeps the Score, and
Yeah.
I enjoy it. However, I think that there are a lot more indigenous to us practices of
Yep.
knowing that connection and
Yep.
understanding it. And I believe in the therapy space as taking that in with your whole culture in mind,
hmm
right? Not in the
hmm
white way of how were you harmed and how will I tell you about yourself in that way?
hmm
More so of like, where do I feel harm in
Yeah.
my body? Where does that come from? How far back does it come from? And how deep can it go?
hmm Absolutely. All right. Thank you for that. If people want to reach out to you, where can we find you, or what's the best places to connect, whether it's social media or email or website or anything like that?
Yeah. Well, I have a website, surrattpsychology.com. And I also have Instagram on the same name. If you want to find me to work with me, I run a few group therapies that I'm starting up. One is for Black women trying to learn about attachment theory. Um, I've got one for Black folks experiencing or experienced spiritual trauma or religious trauma. And then lastly, I've got a COVID support group that I believe very strongly in beginning. We're out of it, but we're not out of it. And I very
Right.
much feel like it's like we need a space to be like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah,
You know?
exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, you can find me there. And then I also work at Resiliency and Health Institute in a group practice for individual therapy as well.
Awesome. Awesome. And we'll be sure to link all those things to the show description. All right. That is our interview for today. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.